I would like to introduce moderator of the first panel, Catherine Merkel. She's head of the Culture and Cultural Heritage Division at the Directorate of Democratic Citizenship and Participation at the Council of Europe. Please.
Thank you very much, and if you approve, I will be moving up there. Thank you very much. And having experienced the last 2 days some difficulties sometimes with technology, you just tell me if I am too loud or not speaking up enough. So, oops. Yeah, so thanks first of all on behalf of the Council of Europe for having the chance to be here with you and to moderate this first panel discussion. And I must say, as a political organization, this is very important, and this is really an honor for me to be here, because populism is the issue at this very moment within our organization. Whilst we are meeting here today in Strasbourg, back home, there is the 2007 World Forum on democracy taking place, dedicated to the issue of populism, and there's like 2,000 people gathering and discussing implications in 13 labs. And one of these labs actually deals with the issue of what they call activism against populism, meaning exploring the role of arts and culture in shaping political ethics and values, and of course the impact on generating social political change. Now, populism, of course, we are fully aware that this is overused catch-all label, so we must be careful. And yet I do not want to enter now in this framework here into the definitions and into the delimitations, but I think in our discussion we will be touching upon that. I would like to very briefly mention to you another product that has been brought up recently by our Secretary General, Jagland, and that is the 2017 report on the state of democracy, human rights and rule of law in Europe. And here Jagland resumes, after having checked democratic performance, human rights performance, rule of law performance in all member states, using the Council of Europe's own monitoring instruments according to the existing conventions, that indeed our democracies may go backwards. And he concludes that the politics of reason and openness must prevail over tensions, confrontation and chauvinism, and that the Human Rights Convention remains the ultimate backstop for our democracies, and that political leaders should resist the quick gains of populist politics. Now, so this is of course the level of hope. This is what we all aspire to. But then we know that populism comes in different forms and shapes, and here culture seems to be probably the most apt container for it, if I may use this word of container, when it is namely used as a delimitation concept instead of opportunity for participation and exchange. And of course, you're specialists on culture and cultural policy, so we all know how much this is related to issues of identity and difference. Who am I? Who are you? And why are you so different? And then these fears of being overrun, job loss, losing own prosperity, losing own values, etc., all these issues that we expect behind the current increasing populism movements. And this has already been partly mentioned, or in the question that I just heard by Jaroslav Andl about nationalism and the origins of the national institutions. And we find this renewed emphasis on dominant national cultures now everywhere. And we know that it's not really representative of the reality, which is hybrid more and more. And yet we have it in France, in Le Pen's party program, in the German Leitkultur, specifically painful for a German national to see this reappearing. We have it in the Nordic countries with the true Finns and some other true ones. And of course Central and Eastern Europe, as Peter Dueland in his paper, yesterday's conference, noted. Indeed, the Visegrad countries are all led by what can be called populist leaders. So then, against this background, of course, the subject and the topic of this panel proposed by our organizers here is extremely pertinent. How do the national institutions fare, placed as they are at this intersection between the institutional, the governance system, the cultural system, which possibly is a wild system, having listened to Pascal Gielen just now, and then the public with all its expectations. These institutions, partly they are really monuments, they are monumental agencies and flagships, and some of them are still nation branding, or again nation branding, or more than ever nation branding, or listening to you, they shouldn't be nation branding maybe anymore at all, because this may be an ahistoric concept very soon. So we're very curious to see what the challenge and the chance of these institutions is in a world that breaches globalization and cosmopolitism and universal access and universal communication. Anything goes, whilst people in many, many countries seem to resort to more earthy, local, self-centered, defensive modes of action and Befindlichkeit. I don't know how to translate this beautiful German word of Befindlichkeit. It's not really mood. And the problems that people are faced with seem to be very much of the earth and very tangible. So I don't think that a cultural message will somehow satisfy the very earthy and very material and tangible need of an unemployed, threatened by 5 challenges. But then again, we learned yesterday in yesterday's conference that it's not really the economic factors that explain what we see as growing populism. So there's much more behind that, and this needs to be much more explored. So the challenge now to see in how far national cultural institutions may offer something, some answer. Possibly, as you said, a heterotopia of images and ideas at a moment when everything is flowing and disappearing. Can these institutions bridge the gaps and provide answers? Can they animate the debates? Do they understand what's going on? As state-funded agencies as they are, sometimes I'm asking myself, are they actors really, or are they victims themselves? And what are they witnessing in terms of this culture-government relationship, or as you framed it, civic-civil relationship? So this is on the table, and now let me welcome my panelists, Goran Tomka, Shiri Jirshi Fait, and Tamas Yasai. Sorry for the imperfect pronunciation. Goran, this is Goran. Tamasha. And Yoshi, hello, who I haven't yet met before this morning. Hello. Hello. So a few words on the panelists. Goran is a researcher and lecturer at the Faculty of Sport and Tourism in Novi Sad, and he's UNESCO Chair in Cultural Policy and Management from Belgrade. He's doing currently a doctorate in Culture and Media at Belgrade Faculty of Dramatic Arts. He's very much into the qualitative audience studies, cultural diversity policy issues, and has been a trainer, activist, and cultural manager in several organizations, cultural organizations in different places, in Serbia, but also in Berlin. And as I understand, Goran drafted the strategy for Novi Sad's European Capital of Culture. That seems to be successful, has been successful, is forthcoming in 2021. Jirshi Fait is an art historian, curator, university teacher, and the general director of the National Gallery in Prague. He runs science, research, exhibition, and publishing projects at the University of Leipzig's Leibniz Institute, and he authored numerous treatises, catalogs, books devoted to art patronage. Yoshi prepared numbers of international exhibitions, including for the MoMA in New York, Städtle in Frankfurt, Art History Museum in Vienna, and of course the National Gallery in Prague on historic topics, but also very, very modern things. I understand exhibitions on Gerhard Richter's and Ai Weiwei's works. And Tamas Yashai, a critic, editor, university lecturer and editor of the biggest cultural webpage in Hungary. It's called Revisor. Besides that, he publishes reviews, interviews, reports in all Hungarian cultural magazines, and he teaches as well at university. He teaches at the Second University. He did a PhD dissertation on the history of the renowned Hungarian independent performance group Kretakör. And he curates the Hungarian showcase edition of events, Dunapart. He did that in 13, 15, and again in 17. So I have been talking far too long. I will be very quiet now and asking very short questions. Apologize. Maybe we start with the question, a more general question, what our panelists think about the national cultural institutions, their role, risk, and challenge. And as our panel clearly is oriented towards the issue of populism, I would like to have your specific insights in this direction as well, in order also to avoid too much of an overlap with the forthcoming discussion that we will be holding in panel 2. So thank you very much, and Goran, maybe you start.
Hello everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Catherine, for your questions. I do think that it is very dangerous today to simply say that populism is something bad happening out there, that it is some kind of a lie, that it is some kind of totalitarian thing, a communist thing, a nationalist thing, ultra-right thing, that we all us good people are fighting against, because we are then doing a lot of simplifications and a lot of historical and analytical mistakes. So what I would like to offer is a really short and quite simple, I guess, definition, is that populism is any kind of discourse, any kind of claim, or any kind of image of a society, if you like, or of a community, which claims that there is one homogeneous group of people with homogeneous identity who are somehow endangered, they are threatened, they are disprivileged, they are marginalized, even though they are a majority, they are the populace, so they are the ones who should be in power, so they are endangered by some other group. In that claim, there is always some kind of sense of that other group, and I'll go more into that, what can that other group be. And then finally, there is always this moralizing tone, so that we, the majority, we, the endangered, are the good ones, the virtuous ones, the ones with the right to rule and so on. And then the other group is usually some kind of small, evil, power-occupying group. Now, if I tell that, I guess that it is most easy to imagine some kind of a nationalist populist discourse, like we Serbs are, you know, the righteous ones, and for centuries everyone is attacking us, so we should reclaim our, you know, right to our freedom against Croats, Kosovars, Albanians, and all the others that are bordering us because they're all attacking us all of the time, you know. That is a nationalist populist discourse, but we can also imagine all kinds of populist discourses, a religious populist discourse, even a communist populist discourse. Marx was, in so many instances, quite a populist when he says, we, the working class, against the few, you know, bourgeoisie, capitalists, and so on and so on. So there are various populisms today, and actually current populism is quite a liberal populism. So it is claiming that, yes, we are all endangered, but we don't mention some of the key problems with today's societies. And this is what I mentioned a couple of days ago, and that is that actually, if we are looking for trouble and why we have so much populism today, it is really important to look at what Pascal said, repressive liberalism or liberal democratic governance, because it is these governments who somehow taken the equality from the democratic equation and said the only thing that is important is liberty, and no, equality is not anymore an important category. And populist discourse can only function in a context in which we have a problem with equality. And this is why all the liberals are so afraid about populism, not only because it is a moving discourse that claims change of social structure, but it is also a discourse that is constantly evoking this notion of equality, which is, export or how to say, pushed out of our public debates. But then the second, even more problematic thing that has to exist in order for populist discourses to be desirable in a society is this idea of fixed identity. So only if you have an essentialist fixed idea of who you are, you can feel close or related, or you can identify yourself with the populist discourse. So this whole idea of homogeneous group who has one and one only discourse, I'm Serb and nothing else, we know who is Serb and what it means to be a Serb and so on, or I'm a Catholic, or I'm a working class, or whatever, this is the only then the whole populist discourse can have certain kind of desirability for you. If you feel marginalized, so if there is a lack of equality, and if you feel that there is only one truth about your identity. Now, why am I talking this? Because we can now, I think, more easily see what is the role of cultural institutions for last centuries that played in setting the scene for the desirability of populist discourses today. For one, cultural institutions have not talked enough or a lot about equality. So the whole artistic system is not based on the idea of equality. It has been even, how to say that, an enemy of democratic ways of thinking and so on. That's one problem. But then the other more important problem is that they played a very important role in constructing these homogeneous identities, in explaining that we are, this one and only way of being and so on and so on. It started already in the Enlightenment era with the whole idea of individual who is autonomous person with this freedom, with this distance from others, with this fixed core in which, you are the one who uses your reason, you're the one who can have this autonomy and quite a feeling of wholeness, feeling of fixation inside of you. This is who you are. So if we are looking into what could be then the change, what could cultural institutions do? Well, they could precisely reverse that whole process. So on the one level, on the cognitive level, what they should do is unlock these categories. This is the, anti-hegemonic, radical democratic, if you like, narrative. So how to unlock these categories? How to say, no, being Serb is this, but also that, but then what is actually Serb, and so on and so on. So unstabilizing categories to which we can hold. This is one important thing. But then it is of course not only cognitive, not only a rational process, but democracy is also an affective thing. So being able to sense, to feel others, to feel yourself in others, to feel others in yourself, being able to imagine different worlds, being able to feel relation to other people, being able to feel part of the community, being able to feel all other parts of, all other things. So this emotional if you want, intelligence, but also emotional sensitivity is really important for battling any kind of populism, but also any other kind of fixed narratives. And finally, culture is also about practice, as Pascal also mentioned. Culture and democracy is also about practice. So what can culture institutions be? They can be places in which we practice democracy, in which we engage in actual democratic practices. And this is what a lot of relationist art is doing, a lot of socially engaged art is doing. So first, unlocking categories, so confusing us a bit with certainties that we have, and then offering us space to feel others, to feel self as this multiple, hybrid, changing, evolving self, and finally practicing what it means to disagree, what it means to be different, what it means to come to an agreement despite the initial disagreement, what it means to spend time with others in a dissonance. So what it means to have different views on the society, what it means to have a different views on identity, what it means to negotiate this process. And for me, cultural institutions are pretty well equipped to do that. And we see a lot of museums, a lot of theaters already doing that. But yes, if you're funded by national government, but equally if you're funded by a big corporation, there will be certain identity that is not welcome to be shaken. So every system of governance needs some kind of fixation in order to manipulate. I mean, to be really banal, you can't manipulate water. You need a glass in order to manipulate water. You need some kind of structure, some kind of fixture in order to manipulate, to manage, to govern things. So something always has to be fixed. But what we can do, and this is what Rancière beautifully wrote in his evasive, elusive subjects and so on, is to shake this categorical, this ontological plane in which we all live. And by that, we are actually undermining the power. Sorry if I took too much time.
Thank you very much. This was very, very comprehensive. Wonderful first statement, raising many, many issues, from the more political, governmental, to the, should I say, almost pedagogical or socio-pedagogical, psychological level. And of course, all of these are probably required. Now, I'm wondering, I mean, this sounds like already a menu for action, what you have said, but I'm wondering, in terms of access, who actually visits these national cultural institutions, or these cultural institutions, if we leave the national away for a time being? All these good things possibly being done by the institutions, to whom? To those that are going there. But those that are going there, I believe, I'm afraid, after having been involved for many, many years in cultural policy and policy research, is a very selected group. And now I turn to the institutional representative who knows it all, about VIP institutions. So how would you see this equity, equality possibility of addressing and, so to say, training people, if it's only those that attend that are already probably very much enlightened, if I may use that word? Yes.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, we've heard many interesting ideas and opinions, and I would share almost all of them. We've heard by Pascal what is actually an engagement of an institution. We've heard now the whole, well, inner structure, or how to approach actually the public, what is the goal, what is necessary to be done. And back to your question, this is of course a crucial one. Who is actually the one we are going to approach, and what kind of tools do we have to do so and to attract? 'Cause of course, any culture institutions would like to attract a lot of as many people as possible. So we are doing our programming for a broader public, but you are definitely right that the number of visitors are not broadless, that it is a certain number we can achieve. And on the other side, we haven't actually used, in the sector of museums specifically, we have to focus our attention on regions, because we are mostly sitting or based in major cities. And what we forgot actually in the past is somehow to address the people who are living in the countryside. And the result we can see now, having the results of a couple of parliamentary elections, in France or in Czech Republic actually recently as well. We simply forgot to address those who are not very familiar with the culture we are offering, we are creating. And I would like to maybe mention one quite interesting sample of our program which try to solve this issue. This is a program called Artist Rooms by Tate Modern in London, who took into consideration this issue, and they simply developed a very thoroughly thought and intellectually challenging program which they offered to the regional museums to which they were cooperating with. And together with the regional museums, they brought actually the high culture into the region. And this wasn't only the content, they brought as well know-how, how to do a exhibition, how to create a programming, how to create a public program which is around every exhibition, which disseminate the messages we would love to. So this was one of the examples I think should be followed, and I appreciate it really a lot. And we are considering at the moment in my institution actually to work on something very similar, simply to go out from our large cities to enter the region, to speak with the people there, to animate the dialogue actually with those people who are living there. And of course, we've heard it several times today, that the main issue of any cultural institution is, of course, to defend certain values, principles of liberal democracy. So,
thank you very much, Yoshi. And this is, of course, a very promising approach. It sounds like a very promising approach, decentralization of major programs, specific programs. I would like to move on to Tamas, who probably has quite some views on this as a critique. He writes about many different cultural performances, sectors and areas, and covers also several countries, as I understand. So I suppose you have a very special take on what has been said already and what you plan to tell us anyway. And then maybe also to prepare already for the next round, I would also like to link to this my question that popped up when I read the suggested title of this panel, suggested by the organizers on populism. So I was of course also thinking and suspecting, coming from Strasbourg and the Human Rights Organization, suspecting that there must have been some cases possibly of intrusion of policy making that the institutions may not have liked so very much, or at least are alerted to, or at least there may be a potential of such intrusion. And here again I would also have some light shed by you into this. But first, Tamas, now it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you for the invitation. What I'm gonna tell very briefly is quite connected to what Pascal Guillen said and previous two panelists. I'm a theater critic and a performing arts critic, so my experience is mostly limited to performing arts field, and my examples come from this field, but you know, I think so some of these experiences can be still interesting if we accept that theater is still the place where from the stage we can share very easily messages or direct messages to many people at the same time. So the question about the national cultural institutions and their role today, I tried to find an example that can be used for us today, and I want to speak a bit about the National Theatre in Budapest or in Hungary. Don't worry, first I go back to the 19th century, but it will be a very short introduction because what happened in the 19th century, I think we have some parallel movements today, especially in the role of the National Theatre, or what National Theatre means in Budapest or in Hungary today. I think everybody knows that the national theatres were created in the 19th century to create a fixed national identity. They were thought to be, or they were intended to be homogeneous. They were clear or closed institutions in a way, I mean ethnically and religiously. They spoke there the national language, they played national dramas, and it was a very important tool or an instrument to create a national identity. But of course today we know that it was very reductive way of thinking about reality and the world, because usually in these institutions they presented only one culture, one ideology, and so on and so on. We already spoke about this. I jump a bit after the Second World War, when the present Hungarian theatrical system was founded. Nowadays, what we have in our theaters is based on repertory and based on a constant ensemble, which means that these national cultural institutions, I mean the national theaters or theaters, city or state theaters, are usually working in huge buildings with a huge infrastructure, with many employees, and you know, the budget of these institutions, or at least the half or more than half of the budget of these institutions go for maintaining the building, the infrastructure, the other half for paying all the taxes after the employees, and yes, there is some money for creating shows or creating performances, making productions. Okay, so you have to know these two things to understand the situation at the National Theatre today, because I think, so this is the basic for it. If you look at our National Theatre in Budapest right now from the outside, and I don't mean the building because it's extremely ugly, so we are not speaking about the building but about the institution itself. It looks like everything's fine because there are many directors coming from abroad. I mean from, for example, Poland and Russia and Romania, and some of them are very famous and well-known directors. There is a constant ensemble in the theater. There is a big repertory with, like, I think 40 plays at least. Many of them come from our national drama heritage, so or the famous or important Hungarian national dramas are part of the repertory. But if you go there as an insider, and as a theater critic, I think I'm in a way an insider, so you can see that there are many troubles. Just a few examples. For example, so there are 3 stages in the National Theatre in Budapest. The main stage serves like, I think, 700 seats, so it's a 700 seats venue, which is a huge venue, of course. In the repertory for the main stage, there are 15 plays. 2/3 of these 15 plays was directed by the director of the National Theatre, which means, you know what does it mean, I think. I think it's quite evident. It's Mr. Otto Widnyanski. Maybe you have heard about his name. He directs mostly Hungarian plays, not exclusively Hungarian plays, but mostly Hungarian plays. And he has some very interesting initiatives, for example, and it's connected with this opening up the institution. For example, he invites many shows from the provinces to the National Theatre, but you know, there is always another side, because these are not very good productions, unfortunately. Or another thing, he gives chance to high school students to go to the National Theatre for free to watch his shows. But you know, there is the other side, which means that the so-called normal spectators are not really interested in this kind of theater. So it's a very, I think, a very sensitive situation right now. And one short closing remark, he's been the director of the National Theatre for 5 years, and before his term, I mean the previous 5 years, so from 2008 to 2013, the head of the National Theatre was Robert Alföldi, who is, I think, one of the most popular directors in Hungary. He's a real celebrity, but you know, there are some problems with him because, for example, he's openly gay, and you know, he couldn't stay there as the director of the National Theatre, because somehow we feel that if something is national, it has to be, you know, very traditional, very conservative, straight, if it's possible. So, yeah, I don't know if it was an answer to your question, but maybe some, okay.
Let's say, thank you, Tamás, first of all. Thank you very much for giving us a deeper insight in the very specific national scene in Budapest, and this, yeah, it was a kind of unexpected insight, but it's also quite revealing and telling. I mean, almost not daring to ask further questions if being gay already is a main problem for being a director of a national institution. So what can we say here? I'm quite interested, as I said before, but tell me if this is the wrong approach, so please, I will be stepping back, but are there incidences of interventions, of interferences of a kind of a nationalistic or populist or kind into the works of your national institutions as far as you can see in your countries? Is there something of interest, to be discussed, and then of course to be checked on what the checks and balances would be? I am aware of a recent incident regarding the Collegium Hungaricum in Vienna, where an exhibition was planned, was agreed, was programmed, the artists well known, and in the end the artworks were put up and then they had to be taken down by decision of the director, because those artworks showed the apparently Hungarian flag, but not the way it should be, but slightly artistically modified version. So the artworks had to be taken down again. The artists themselves had a chance to take pictures of that, and that of course went round the community, and in the end apparently then the exhibition has had probably many more visitors than it would have had without this incident. So this is kind of interesting in several respects. Please. Goran, maybe first, followed by Yoshi. Thank you.
What I find actually even more interesting is what you a bit touched upon, and that is this whole confusion, hybridization of all possible discourses, all possible approaches. Right now in Serbia, we have a new cultural strategy for 10 years, and a lot of critics, they simply use old, tools to analyze and say, yeah, this is a nationalistic discourse and so on. But at the same time, that document is full of European values, full of European integration. It is then full of some medieval, pre-national ideas and images of even some prehistoric people who lived in that area, who we are somehow weirdly, magically related to, so pre-modern narratives. Then we have some super modern narratives with tolerance and all of these things together. And I think that Serbia is actually quite a laboratory for what is called post-politics or post-ideology, because you can't actually understand what is going on except that power is, serving its own interest. But we have a prime minister who was in the 90s, going with a knife to kill Bosniaks and Croats, who is now, his main advisor is Tony Blair. We know that Tony Blair is one of the founders or one of the best students of post-politics, post-ideology. We are one day they are going to Russia and singing songs to Latin American presidents. Tomorrow they are very good friends with Angela Merkel, and she says that they are really good politicians. So you can't really follow on the ideological plane what is going on. And this is precisely what is post-ideology. Pascal also mentioned it after the 1989. Now this is the end of history. Democracy has won and so on. But actually what we do not want to talk about is disagreements and conflicts. So we don't have conflicts, everything goes. This is this liberal whole thing. And in the cultural sphere, it's really like that. So one day you can have this completely strange, ultra-nationalist events. Tomorrow you can have something completely different. In the last 5 or 6 years, the only really real moment of censorship was done by same person who ran European Capital of Culture project in Novi Sad and showed and spent a lot of time in Brussels and all over the place, always discussing this pan-European thing, and then comes back home and censors something that is criticizing Orthodox Christianity. So I think we need to develop new mechanisms of critique, new ways of understanding this whole thing. This whole chaos, which works quite well for those in power.
Thank you very much, Goran. Thank you. And I would like immediately to pass on to Yoshi, who also has probably cases to report on.
Yes, I do, but it's not the case, fortunately, of this republic. And I really appreciate it a lot that we weren't facing actually any trial how to interfere into the programming of the national institutions. I did not experience anything like this so far. And what we've achieved actually, let me remind you of a couple of examples or 2 examples. We were the institution who opened our gate in order to build up a platform to welcome the Dalai Lama and his delegation here, which was actually forbidden from the higher authorities, like, you know, the office of the state president and so on. We have 6 premises in the historical center of Prague, and 3 of them are located just in front of the Prague Castle, so facing Prague Castle actually. And then we decided simply to open our gates, to build up on our ground the platform from which Dalai Lama had a chance to greet Prague citizens or Czech citizens or tourists maybe. So this was one activity which was actually clearly against the mainstream of the state policy here, because during the last time, unfortunately, the policy changed into very much pro-Russian, pro-Chinese, and so that's why we simply decided to go a different way, different direction. And another sample facing the very xenophobic discussion in this society, in this specific region of Europe, I would say East Central Europe, is full of these discourses that we shouldn't care of them and it's not our problem, it's problem of them, and so on and so on. But it matters, of course, and facing this kind of discussions, I simply decided to speak to one of my friends who is Ai Weiwei, and we've invited him, and we came up with a huge project, site-specific project, which communicates the topic refugee crisis, migration in general, and so on and so on. So we can do here actions, activities which actually open new horizons to the public, and we are animating, we are motivating the dialogue regarding these specific issues. But back to the bed samples, you've pointed out the situation in Hungary. I know the situation quite well among our colleagues from different museums, and they are facing actually quite strong interference with from the political sphere. And it's quite interesting because there is a great tendency to build up or to use culture as an instrument of really new nationalistic propaganda, which is actually hidden behind the international curtain. Because you're creating there a museum island, for example. You know, of course, the project, which is a very costly project. It looks quite interesting. On the other side, one could feel watching, you know, the designs and the conceptual issues that this is really very much about international scale of culture in Hungary and so on, but in the very center you have the Hungarian culture on itself. The head of this museum decided to change the whole infrastructure. As you know, he decided to gain the National Gallery, to join it with the Museum of Fine Arts. Doesn't matter whether there were people, and there were many people actually who were against this step. So there is a very strong influences, for example, in your country, unfortunately. And I would say that a very similar situation we are facing in Poland at the moment. And we are quite regularly meeting with my colleagues from the major art museums worldwide twice a year, and we are in a very thorough way and seriously discussing the social responsibilities of large art museums or encyclopedic museums. And there is quite interesting experience I made. Europe is actually more open to any kind of activism or engagement in political affairs than our American colleagues are, because they experience and they live in the situation that there is no need to deal with the policy makers actually, but they have their board of trustees. And this is the decisive and decision makers. Those are members of the board who decide about anything which is going to happen in the museum. So there is another threat, facing the situation in the States. So there is still, we in Europe have, I would say, more privileged position. We are more free than our colleagues in the States.
Thank you very much, Yoshi. Yeah. What you just said in your last words, it's nice to hear about, I'm adding one word to what you said. I mean, it's nice to hear about corporate social responsibility in the arts sector, in the cultural sector. And that is also one of the avenues that I wanted to develop in this discussion this morning. And I have this question of, is there such a thing that we would or could expect the art sector to play that role that has been called by one of our recent authors of a more intellectual paper on democracy and populism, Jan Werner Müller, a German political scientist, and he wrote about a role of civil disobedience by artists in the cultural sector. And I was wondering, is there such a thing? I mean, traditionally we know that it was always the artists who first spoke, who saw, who dared, who put themselves on stage, and of course who were punished. And at times of conflict we also know that it's the artworks that are going to be burned and the books and stages emptied. So concluding from that, there seems to be some danger in these quarters. Would you think that there is such a role? And maybe you can have a very short statement on this, because I also see that we are running out of time, and I also want to close, I want to open the floor at this stage then to the audience and have their questions, if there are any, before we are closing this first morning session. So Goran, what is your take on this?
Yeah, I think that in all these cases in which we discuss, the desirability of these fixed identities and these clear categories is actually that we, in this whole fluid world in which we cannot trust our governments, our military, our this and that, we are trying to find something to hold on to feel secure. And for me, the key challenge of education and culture and media is how to produce the feeling of security without the instability. So how can we feel okay, feel fine, even though we are insecure? This is something that has been also discussed in the whole precarity literature. So how can we not fall into these promises of security and so on? So how can we feel secure in this turbulent world? And for me, art has a really great role here, because being able to play, being able to wonder, being able to discover is, I think, something that can offer us this way out of these insecurities and fears. Because sometimes if we lose these fixed categories, but if we understand that as some kind of a challenge, some kind of a game, some kind of a task, then we might, yes, get out of this situation that we hold on to other things, that we get aggressive in defending these categories and so on, so that we can actually hold on to. And I'd just like to conclude with, I had a great luck that my parents could not tell me who am I in the ethnical and national sense, because I live in Vojvodina, northern part of Serbia, which has this history of multiculturalism. So when I asked my parents, like, who am I? They said, like, we don't know, actually. I mean, not because they were philosophers, they really didn't know, you know? So what actually happened, they told me, like, we don't know, but go ahead and look, you know, search for it. We don't know. And I'm still searching. And I don't feel threatened because I don't know who am I in this ethnical category. Okay, I got stuck to other categories. But anyway, I think it's a nice situation that in this state of insecurity, that we can turn to creativity, to play, to learning as well, to discovery in order to feel nice in this world.
Yeah, just a short remark about your previous question with this and what Jerzy said. I think I have to emphasize that in Hungary there is no open censorship, so I'm absolutely sure about this. But of course, I would mention two other things that are really important. And it's connected with the Collegium Hungaricum thing you mentioned in Vienna. I would call it a typical example of self-censorship. I think, yeah. So I think the leader of the institute, you know, she just wanted to be a good girl. That's all. And the other thing is what can be felt from time to time in Hungary as well, but as you said, in Poland today is an everyday reality, is economical censorship. So to put it in a very straight way, if we don't like what you do on stage or in a gallery or something, we just don't give you money. And from time to time it happens in Hungary as well. Some of you might remember the case like 5 years ago when all the Hungarian independent theater groups were waiting for their state subsidy for 1.5 years. So not 1.5 months, but 1.5 years. And you know, there were two options. You die. I mean, you don't do any shows because you don't have the subsidy. Or the other thing is that you do what you planned for free. But this is a very dangerous example, I think, because then the government can say that, okay, then you don't need money for doing art, do it for fun. You can do it for free. So that's just a quick note for the previous one. And about the civil disobedience role, yes, of course, it would be great if it could work, but I'm sorry, I'm quite pessimistic about this, and it's connected with the title of our panel, with the big institutions, because, for example, in Hungary, these institutions are not, you know, not open and playful and creative spaces. They are fixed and closed and not inviting spaces. Just one example, and you will think that I'm obsessed with the National Theatre in Budapest, but it's funny that we are talking about it in a church, but I don't know if you have heard it, but in 2013 the National Theatre in Hungary was consecrated. So it's a sacred place, literally, now, which is for me really absurd, but it shows what the new director wants to emphasize. And so it doesn't mean that they play only religious plays or, I don't know, or rituals on stage, of course not. But still, it's a very strong message. And you know, with a message like this, you cannot, so there won't be any, I don't know, young or independent artists who want to go there because all the gates will be closed. Maybe in the name of Christ, or I don't know, but yeah. So I'm pessimistic, but it would be great.
So since you are pessimistic, but well-argued pessimistic, we may now have a well-argued, maybe more optimistic final intervention, or almost final intervention by Jerzy before then we take your questions, dear very patient audience.
Thank you. You're definitely right that the more unstable situation we are living in, the more important is the role of art. Art is using different means, different tools, different language, and so we should make use of this. And regarding this issue, we are cooperating in a very close way at the moment, for example, with a private foundation, which is, you know, this so often called private-public cooperation. The foundation is called TBA, Thyssen-Bornemisza Art Contemporary 21, funded by Francesca von Habsburg. And it's a very inviting, it's very open-minded institution or foundation. And we are going to open as a joint project a institution. Well, this is part of the National Gallery, but still as a new institution which should be totally open, which must be friendly, which must be open-minded, which must support the values we are speaking about at one of our premises. And we are not going to show the amazing collection they collected of contemporary art, because they are just focusing on the art from the last 2 decades, so very contemporary art, which is of course very much political. So we are going to open it next June, and we do approach different topics which which are of our interest, of course, and they are very much political. So I think the institution must become more and more political, must become more and more engaged in the current situation. And this is really the social responsibility of major art institutions or culture institutions. And culture can move things forward, or can change things. So just a positive remarks, closing remarks of this part of our discussion.
Thank you very much for this one. Are there any questions by the audience? And I see there are questions from Scotland. Andrew, you have the floor, please.
Well, it's nice to be known for where I live. Yes, I thought ironically, well, thank you for the great presentations first. Ironically, if you look at national cultural institutions, they look pretty much all the same. I mean, I think if you got off a spacecraft and looked at them all, you'd think they were pretty much the same thing. And they do tend to have large, often old, and very expensive buildings. So Pascal's presentation made me think about the Palestinian Circus School. And it also reminded, because he had the picture of the circus, and it reminded me also of my own national theatre, which is a non-building based theatre. Those two institutions managed to be activist. They managed to involve a very wide range of people in creating things. So do national cultural institutions need to escape their buildings more to be able to push back against this sort of agenda of narrowing down our cultural space? That narrowing down seems to come with nationalism, but it also comes, somebody mentioned Tony Blair, it also comes with that kind of managerialism that Tony Blair sort of practiced so much. So it's, is there an opportunity for national institutions to really think about getting out of their buildings more, abandoning their buildings, or having a new kind of practice?
Who wants to reply to this one?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm very happy that you mentioned that the National Theatre of Scotland works like the. Oops. So it works like this, and actually, well, I'm sorry, it's only in Hungarian, but there was an application 10 years ago that was based, actually again, the National Theatre of Budapest, that was based on the idea of National Theatre of Scotland. So, and it's in Hungary, but I would say that in Central Europe, it would be a utopia. I'm afraid it could never happen. But so what these two, so it was written by a theater director and a dramaturg, a theater theoretician, and they try to create an open and inviting space with no building, with no constant ensemble, with many, many guest plays from the whole country. And what is the most utopistic for me in this wonderful application is that they look at the theater in Hungary as a one and undivided sector or something. and that's not true anymore, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. Are there any further questions? Oh yeah, I see.
Yes, yes.
Thank
It is not really a question. I want to say that I'm really, really very happy about this morning. The people, they know me, they understand that I don't take very often the micro because why have to do this? But I'm really happy about the lecture from Pascal and about the four speeches today. I like a lot this idea about civil activities between creativity and criminality. I like this very, very much. And I hope we can put this in our structures, in our thinkings, in our askings for new words, in our professional and private life. Because I don't want to take to speak a lot, but as for 17 years, I established in Germany a series of books, Hybrid Worlds. And as a woman from the Balkan in the German university world, I was often put on the corner of criminality. And and this idea between criminality and creativity give me a lot of hope and make me so happy. So I have only to thank for this.
Pascal?
Thank you. No, but I think also related to the debate, and I had no time to go in this. I think the whole thing about nowadays about creativity and criminality is also at the other side. How I see nowadays how governments, and that's something which was in your talks, but not analytically. What we see is the whole mixture of neoliberalism and neo-nationalism. And they play this game with each other, and it's a tricky chaos where they use the post-political chaos, but they do this often, and this is very interesting. I saw it in Spain, for example, with discussing with recettes, etc., is that they, wait, I start with an anecdote, but it's very interesting. It happened in Belgium, that at a certain moment the provinces are not responsible anymore for culture. Then the government decided, okay, then it needs to be for the communities or something else. But the new Flemish Alliance, the nationalist party, came also and said, oh no, then we can privatize some museums. And then they go into the board and they can stay there because there is no democratic reason anymore to kick them out, because it's a kind of private institution. So you see that the market is used, and the neoliberal system of privatizing is used, in fact, to repoliticize institutions, but in a very authoritarian way, in a non-democratic way. And they, in fact, this is criminal. That's what I wanted to say. This is really, and the fire also what I saw in Spain is exactly that they say, you cannot do this. This is in our constitution that you cannot do this. So sometimes playing on this field is literally pointing at what politicians themselves at a certain moment do is illegal. It's not related to the constitution. So that's also a very important thing. I think when you start something in your institution, which can be risky, the first thing, that's what Rosetta said, the first words, what they say in the lecture when they come, know your constitution, know your laws, and you can use them against the politics what is dominant at this moment. And I think this is very important also to deal with this kind of problems.
Já budu muset asi požádat paní překladatelku, aby mi pomohla. Já bych se na tu nezákonnost podíval trošku z českého hlediska, protože regionální kulturní instituce byly převedeny pod správu krajů v České republice. Jestli můžete jít ven a pomoct mi to přeložit. Stalo se v Severočeském kraji, že divadlo mělo obrovský problémy s financováním. V současné době se v Severočeském kraji stalo to, že vyhodili 5 ředitelů muzeí a krajská vláda si stanovila svoje pravidla. To znamená, že výběrová řízení na nové ředitele muzeí jsou stanovená na pracovní poměr na 2 roky. Jestli chápete, co je muzeum, který pečuje o historii, tak takováhle práce je naprosto zbytečná. No? Další věc je, že ten ředitel má výpovědní lhůtu bez udání důvodu. Jo? A čili do ruky se dostává nejenom financování veřejných institucí, regionální vládě, regionální reprezentaci, regionální korupci, ale dostávají se jim do rukou i depozitáře, sbírky, které jsou nashromážděné za skutečně celou epochu naší existence. No, je to velice vážný problém. My jsme poslali otevřený dopis ministru kultury a předsedovi vlády. Dostali jsme odpověď, že žádné specifické úpravy pro tyto instituce se neuvažují a že zvolený postup je v souladu se zákonem. To je asi tak všechno, co jsme v té věci zatím jako občanská iniciativa dokázali udělat. Veškeré ostatní národní instituce se k tomu staví velmi, řekl bych, slušně zdrženlivě. Ano, přestože jsme je oslovovali. Jo? To je asi tak, abyste si uvědomili, že třeba populismus může mít v nerozvinutých společnostech poměrně jinou podobu. Ano, že se populismus může velmi dobře snoubit s korupcí. Můžete to zkusit přeložit?
Oni nemají totiž sluchátka.
Já vím, proto chci, aby to řekl.
No. Jak to jenom zkrát?
Well, it's very interesting to talk about corruption and criminality in the cultural world. In the Czech Republic, regional cultural institutions are now managed by regional governments. It's the case in northern Bohemia, where we have funding and the management of these cultural institutions by regional governments, and the directors of these institutions can be fired. Their work contracts are for 2 years only. The notice period is without reason, so they can be fired without any specific reason. And of course, we can't manage museums and big cultural institutions like this. We have sent an open letter to the Prime Minister and Minister of Culture, but we didn't get any clear response. They said that the procedure was completely legal and that they are not planning any changes.
Well, thank you very much for sharing this information. And I'm just wondering, are there any further remarks or questions from the audience? Yeah, there is one, I see.
Děkuji. Ivo Kaplan, Union of European Federalists. I am a little bit confused because I think that the first part was about the same topic as the second part. And this lecture of Mr. Gleven, Mr. Pascal Gleven, was about that the culture is the normal life, is everything, is a way of life, and we should protect this way of life. Culture institutions is like other institutions, it's only institutions. So I think the problem is that we are in the period of the life that we should return to that 16th, beginning 17th century, when you know Prague was the center of Europe because of Rudolphine period, and start to make the real European way of life. Because if I not want to be confused, then I should say that the west part of Europe is about 2-3 decades ahead from that what we are listening and what we listen from the Serbia, Hungary, Czech Republic, and what are the problems of Netherlands, of Groningen and the other cities in the west part of Europe. So if you can explain me somehow, I think Pascal could be the first, and if somebody from the east could also say something, I will be glad. Thank you.
Who of the panelists is ready to reply to the intervention? Pascal, will you?
I don't understand if I understand your remark question good. So I don't know also if I respond good to it. But there is a tricky thing in what you said. I think it's very dangerous to try to reclaim position as institution. That's why that was also my response at the end of the lecture on the question here. To think that that there is such a thing like ordinary culture. I mean ordinary homogeneous culture. Central Europe, European homogeneous culture, which is ordinary. The ordinarity is in the difference and in the huge scape of all differences we have. And even the Chinese are no part of ordinary European culture. Sorry. And that is what we have to bring in as institutions nowadays and have to point out again and again. That it is chaotic. We need to live with this dissensus and at the same time with this diversity. When that's the role of an institution, I agree, but not to find out a kind of tradition of ordinary culture which we then promote as an institution or sit on to communicate with the world what Europe is about.
If you remember Barroso 5 years ago or something like that, he had this project of the new narrative of Europe. And he invited all kind of artists, intellectuals and so on to contribute to constructing the new narrative of Europe. Luckily he failed, but I think it's really dangerous to go into the narrative, because any one narrative in a highly diverse community such as Europe is exclusive. So it will exclude all kinds of people, it will forget all kinds of histories. They tried to, one of the basic pillars of this new narrative of Europe was being able to reconcile and work on the peacemaking and so on. Like, Europe and peace, are you joking? I mean, so any kind of one narrative will necessarily exclude and homogenize and simplify and marginalize all sorts of others. I think it's really important that we find ways to feel good while being confused and find ways to discover well, some kind of, I guess, beauty in not being able to fix things.
I think we are quite a bit over time, and lunch is waiting. So with your agreement, thanks first of all for your patience and your interest and your involvement.